So we are going to talk to you a bit about Pret a Manger and the work we've been doing. So as many of you know, Pret is a really successful coffee and sandwich company with lots of shops, very concentrated in London, but about 380 shops in the UK, plus shops in Hong Kong, France, and the US. And Pret were at the beginning of their digital journey as COVID hit last year. And they were already thinking about building a transactional capability, but obviously with the onset of a pandemic, they needed to think about moving quite quickly and moving at pace. And as well as that, they hadn't quite figured out what propositions would actually be valuable to the customers and valuable to the business. So Erica and I embarked on this kind of piece of work to look at what would be valuable from a customer point of view, but also for Pret. And that meant thinking about, the experience in shops, because Pret is very much a bricks and mortar company. They've been doing the same thing really well for 34 years. So moving into digital was obviously quite a big leap. So we were very much looking at the operational side as well as the customer experience. And Erica and I were fortunate enough to work on this last April, May through into June. I'm going to hand over to Erica to talk a bit about what we were doing.
Hello, everybody. So it's nothing new to do remote user research to design a digital service. So interviews, usability tests as part of the later work we did on the programme. But as a click and collect service for Pret would have an in-store process. And we think as user experience practitioners, we want to solve whole problems for users. We needed to think about designing a complete and great customer experience from contemplating buying your sandwich right through to picking it up in the shop. And so to do that, we needed to make sure we understood customer needs and in-store processes to design this great service. So usually if I was doing a discovery, I'd be in the shop, observing customers, trying to immerse myself in that experience, watching customers interact with the staff, choosing their food. I'd have intercepted them for interviews. And I'd have wanted to learn about shop processes firsthand, because although I've been a Pret customer many times, I've never been backstage at Pret before. I don't know what systems they're using. And so we had to completely rethink the approach we would have taken to immerse ourselves in the experience as we started this right at the beginning of the first lockdown. So we asked the staff to send us videos of in-store processes to help us understand the shop setup. So a handful of shops stayed open near hospitals to serve hospital workers. So there were a few shops who could help us with this. And we weren't geographically located anywhere near enough to go and look at them ourselves. This was so helpful for us to understand the context. And also to understand customer experience. I did a lot of video interviews with customers, but also asked them to send me photographs and just try to understand their contextual experience. The other thing we wanted to do to kind of get a sense of how customers might feel shopping in a Pret once the restrictions were lifted was think about some kind of proxy measures we could use to understand their behaviour. So it's best practice to think about what people, how people might actually behave right now, then ask them to kind of predict how they might behave in the future. And we knew that people were doing essential grocery shopping. So we asked them, how did they feel about being in shops? How did they feel about touching food items, perhaps that other people had touched, interacting with staff? And also, had they started thinking about using delivery or click and collect services that maybe they'd not used before, just to give us a sense of how customer behaviour was changing in the space. The other thing we did was speak to customers in Hong Kong, because coffee shops were still open there under COVID, we were able to get a bit of a sense of what the UK might be like in a few months' time when restrictions were lifted, when we were ready to launch the service, and what we could learn from those coffee shops operating under COVID restrictions. Next slide, please. So through this discovery piece, we kind of identified different user profiles where some people were just super keen to get back to normal, get into Pret, choose their own items, were much more relaxed about COVID. And for those people, if Pret wanted to convert those takeaway customers, we knew we needed to make the service more exclusive, faster, more convenient than heading in as normal for takeaway. But for those who are more cautious, click and collect might offer an opportunity for them to socially distance whilst getting their food. And we had other profiles of people who were shielding at home or who were just very cautious and wanted to wait. And for those people, a delivery service might be more appropriate. And through our staff research, we learned that introducing a new service is going to need to be really carefully managed, because there's suddenly an increase in Deliveroo drivers in the shop. So they're creating these COVID kind of social distancing hotspots that hadn't been there before. We've got increased queues because there were fewer staff because of socially distanced working. And we needed to make sure that if we were going to implement a new click and collect pickup point in the shop, we wouldn't degrade the customer experience for takeaway customers or get in the way of the Deliveroo drivers who needed to fulfill those orders. Next one, please. So towards the end of our discovery, Pret trialled out turning on the pickup option on a well-known delivery platform that they were already using for deliveries, just to see if customers would engage. And this was a great test bed for us. So I used kind of an adapted diary study method, which is where you can contextually get people's lived experience when you're not actually there to view it yourself. So I asked people, I gave them £15 to buy lunch through this service, take photographs along their journey. These are real photographs that some of those people took, so that I could understand contextually what it was like to complete a click and collect order. And we had learned already from our discovery interviews that customers had this really high expectation of the consistency, good service, speed, quality at Pret. And we learned from this trial that there were areas that we would need to really focus on in order to make our new digital and in-shop service a success to meet those customer needs. So we found from this, the notifications in the platform didn't support customers to feel informed, and the in-shop experience didn't support customers to find their order. So we knew that wayfinding was really important, and that there would need to be some really good content design in our notifications and in the user journey, so people knew what to do. And there's some things that were highlighted that are such small things to fix, but we found we were using too much packaging for single drinks. And customers don't like that. Everybody wants to be sustainable. They don't want too much packaging. And we also found that, our bags had no handles, which is great for delivery drivers, but not so much if you're a click and collect customer who's also carrying a laptop and is off to have a working lunch in the park or something whilst carrying their order. And on the staff side, we found that it was confusing for staff who couldn't easily differentiate in the system whether this was a delivery or a pickup order. So we knew there were things we needed to do on that side from a service design perspective. So this little mini trial helped us to consider what we would need to be testing. And we took that forward into some more considered trials for the in-shop experience, while we then worked on optimizing the digital experience alongside. So I'll just pass back to Liz now.
Yeah, so as we sort of embarked on those trials, we wanted to also just stop and look at what they were doing around delivery. So working with Just Eat, Deliveroo and Uber Eats, well known to all of us by now. But this was, a year ago when it was still early days. And we just wanted to look at, how are the teams coping with this new way of working with fulfillment? So there were, looking at managing 3 tablets and a printer on a table, and then how do they manage the drinks coming through? So looking at the receipt, coffee calling to the baristas, thinking about bagging. They needed basically a separate fulfillment area, which was actually front of house. Whereas, as you know, from being in Prets, they're very sort of elegant and nicely designed. And instead we had these quite makeshift setups with tables and racks and napkins, and the staff kind of had to adapt to create basically a sort of impromptu fulfillment area front of house. But from that, we were able to start looking at some of the pain points, what was challenging for them. And we effectively use that as an indicator, as if this is how it works for delivery, there's a good chance that they're also going to find that challenging when it comes to order ahead, click and collect, the kind of, even though the customer's coming to pick it up rather than delivery driver, the fulfillment piece is quite similar. And so from there, we were able to identify what we thought would be some tests to do within the shops. And we ran the trials in 5 shops, and we wanted to basically find out, will customers use the service? How do we get the best operational setup so it's easy for staff to operate? But also, is it going to, generate sales and revenue for Pret? Part of moving to a digital operation is to think about new ways, new channels for customers to use. So within those 5 shops, we had a number of different things we wanted to run, hypotheses to test. So everything from, how we did the bagging, did we put hot and cold food together or separately? How much packaging was used? When to prepare drinks, like should we prepare them just a couple of minutes before customers arrive or wait till they arrive? Lots of concern around, the quality and the temperature of drinks, because coffee is really key. and we also wanted to look at, the positioning of those click and collect stations in terms of how would customers find anything. They're very much used to coming straight up to the till. So these are some of our early sketches where we took the 5 shops and thought about, what's the flow of the customer? Where do they go? Currently, they'll go straight to the till by default. How do we manage them going to somewhere else? How do we signpost to them that, A, there is this service available, but also this is where to go within the shop to find it? And then also thinking about where the team member would go. and how we would set up something that would work for them. So this one actually at Aldgate shows a hatch collection station, which was effectively using their second door as a hatch with a table in the doorway. So very much sort of prototyping out different ideas. And then we only had sort of 2 weeks really to actually get the trials live from the, finishing our discovery. And so you can see it all came to life quite quickly. We had the marketing, we had big vinyls on the windows, the collection areas, and staff to sort of greet in some cases. In other cases, we had a sort of self-serve trial as well. But we tried out a whole load of different variables basically over the space of a month to see what would work and what didn't. Really working closely with the teams. So as you can imagine, to run trials like this, you need to work with the operations team, the property team, marketing, effectively all of the functions across the business. And whilst they're great at working in that way normally within the shop, obviously layering in digital was a new part of this. And we're all working remote as well. So we started using Mural and Miro as our sort of collaboration tools, which is probably the first time we've been using those with Pret. And this is just a snapshot of like one of the boards where we had, everything from the tasks we need to do, the team, the shop layouts, the things we're trying to test. So it's almost like a virtual whiteboard that you'd probably have had if we were been in the office. But that just helped with the ways of working and having daily stand-ups around a real life physical trial, but we still use some of our digital ways of working to try and bring everybody together and collaborate. So we learned a lot through the trials, and Erica's just going to talk through some of the highlights of what we learned from that.
Yeah, so we were evaluating from a customer perspective and also from a staff perspective, because we were taking the view that the staff are users of this service too as they were operating it. So we learned about the signposting. We'd already seen that was very important, and that any confusion there degrades the customer experience considerably. People are so used to how they experience Pret that this could be quite negative. And we just found little things like we expected customers would be wanting order for lunchtime in advance, but people were ordering as soon as possible for kind of ASAP functionality. So that helped us think about what we needed to put into our digital proposition. We had a question about whether customers would mind their drink being pre-prepared on arrival or whether they would want it made as they arrived. And we found that as long as it was hot, customers were happy for it to be made pre-prepared and they could just grab it and go. And they really didn't like too much packaging. And that was just something we'd picked up and fed back to the operational team. And I guess overall, we knew that customer take-up might be low during this period, and that click and collect, it might not be solving a problem for users during the pandemic, apart from those who want to socially distance and still get a Pret experience. But we know that the key problem to solve will be saving time for customers. So as footfall increases, we think that we'll be able to experiment with this again. And alongside this, we were usability testing our digital journey. And then so by the June, we were able to have our first customer, buying a sandwich through our digital experience that we designed and tested, and collecting it in shop using the in-store experience that we'd honed through these trials. That's it. Thanks for listening.